Hi, girls. My name's Wendi Russo, and I'm a pageant coach. I'm also a former competitor, and I really hadn't been competing for that long, but I do know that one thing that's really important to make sure you win your pageant is for you to be successful in the interview room. You're going to have either a panel of judges or you're going to have one-on-one people that you're going to be meeting with individually and have a certain set period of time. So it's really key and important that you have the paperwork that really describes who you are inside and obviously what they might expect from you. If you say you're a doctor, they expect certain things from you. If you're a student, then they would expect certain things from you. So really key that once you get your paperwork in place that you have some mock interviews. It's really important to have that experience so that you don't find yourself in the interview room trying to guess what you should say or saying a lot of ums, looking around the room trying to find the answer. And with me today to join me on our journey to the best interview possible is Allie Carr, Mrs. Minnesota America 2012.
Well, thank you for the sound effects, Wendi. I liked that. So I'm Allie Carr, and I'm Mrs. Minnesota America 2012. And actually, a lot of the reason why I won my title was because of what happened in the interview room. So I think Wendi has some really great tips and points, and I hope that we can help you learn to develop what a great interview will look like.
And my kitty just stepped on my keyboard and muted my mic for a second. So Allie, when we were working together, you obviously are very skilled at speaking. And I know that when I first saw you, you were speaking and announcing for National American Miss, that you have a natural and innate ability to pick the words up off the page and make them come alive. And the reason that's important in the pageant room is because you never sound rehearsed. And, well, okay, I'm not going to say never. Maybe rarely sound rehearsed, because one of the problems I see, and maybe you can tell me if you've seen it as well, is a lot of girls plan their answers and then they lose spontaneity. The judges don't feel their energy as being really connected, and I don't think they come across as authentic. What do you think?
Well, I would agree with you. And I think that for me, that was one of my biggest struggles, is because I felt like I've heard every question. I knew what I wanted to say. I knew how to answer it. I knew how to sound poised and put together. But then the problem was to a judge that could sound very fake. It could sound rehearsed. And I even worked with a mom one time told me that her daughter, when it came to interview, she even said, "Oh no, my daughter knows the perfect answer for that." Well, there isn't always a perfect answer for something, and part of it's being genuine. And so that's something why mock interviews come into play, is because then you catch those areas of yourself where you are being more rehearsed. Even if you really aren't being rehearsed, it can still sound that way and come across that way to someone else.
Well, and one thing that I know when you and I were working together in your preparation for Mrs. Minnesota America is that you are almost so slick that the judges were even saying you're almost maybe a little too slick.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a borderline between coming into an interview room completely unprepared and not knowing what you're going to say or what your agenda is, and then the flip side, someone who's a seasoned competitor, and that's when it would happen, is when you have your answers and it rolls off the tongue almost too easily, and being able to make it more authentic by owning it in the moment and not always having the same answer for it, allowing yourself to really be present and having an organic answer in the moment. Now, Allie, you're also a former national title holder with National American Miss, so you really have a lot of experience in that area. What have you learned over the years in doing interviews?
Well, I think the most important thing, Wendi, and you really touched on it, it's being authentic. So many times I think we forget that when we go into an interview room, yeah, we have judges that they're pageant judges and they've been around the block and they know the game, but some of those judges, they're just as nervous as you are, and they may not always ask those right questions. And that's where I think it's important that you walk out of that interview room feeling like you've communicated who you are, and either you told them why you want to be the title holder, or you've showed them through a story or through being relational or personal in that experience.
Good. I like that you said the story, because one thing that I see as a big glaring error in paperwork and also in interview is giving generalities. They could apply to anybody. It's like literally anyone could be sitting in front of the judge and you would have a one-size-fits-all answer. one of my favorites is under hobbies. I love I love working out. I love traveling. I love reading. I love pageants.
Hmm.
I love, what else?
Well, I know what you mean, but and that's where that's the difference between saying, "Well, I'm training for my first half marathon or my first marathon." So that gets across that I love to work out, but here's what I do with it. Or I love traveling and I've been to Thailand and Italy. Those are ways to make it more memorable, to share that story.
Very good point. So specifics. So if I can give a tip to all of you at home who are watching, it's be specific on your paperwork and allow it to really show who you are. I'll never forget one girl I did work on her paperwork with. She said she loved shooting guns and that no pageant coach has ever let her put that in her paperwork. And that I said, well, tell me more about this. And she told me that she loved shooting guns and she actually taught gun safety to young people who wanted to learn about protecting themselves, and also she was very big activist with gun safety and teaching that. So I felt like, well, to me that was a nice enough tie-in that she could talk about that. And she did love hunting, and I said, well, it's risky to list hunting because not everyone will love hunting. But if it's truly your absolute favorite thing in the world, I don't want you to not be who you are. And so I do think that there is a nice fine line between who you are and really being true to yourself, and then making sure you don't offend people in the room, but you still are who you are. So to work that out ahead of time so that you can be that nice balance, because nobody wants a controversial title holder. But everyone wants a title holder who can balance the line, because there's always going to, controversy always comes up in an interview room, in the midst of being a title holder, and you have to be able to handle it. So I think it's more how the title holder handles controversy rather than how it might be presented in that way. So Allie, why don't we start with some ideas on pageant questions? Because as you said, you've heard every pageant question in the book.
That's what it feels like, yeah.
So what is the most bizarre pageant question you've ever been asked in the interview room?
Honestly, one time I was given a mirror and a judge told me to tell me what you see. And it took me a little bit off guard, and I thought, well, I see myself. And this was a pageant. I was actually, let's see, I think I was 17 at the time. So a little thrown off. But then I took that as an opportunity to be able to tell the judge who I thought that I was, as a confident woman, or at that time I was in high school, and what my goals were, that I look in the mirror and I see a girl who has these dreams, who wants to achieve certain things. So it was an opportunity that I think I handled well, but it did really throw me off.
Did you win?
I did win that one. That was actually my first National American Miss Illinois teen title.
Excellent. Well, you know what? Your instincts were right, and that was an opportunity for you to tell them what you see in yourself, because very often when you're a teen, I think when you're a teen competitor especially, they want to know that you have a positive sense of self, that you have self-confidence, that you're able to be a role model to other people, because a lot of people want to be a role model to others, but are they able to really see their own gifts? And part of what we're all looking for in terms of role models is somebody who is not afraid of adversity, somebody who can overcome obstacles, somebody who is positive, somebody who sees the good in situations and in other people. And so for you to have been able to look at yourself and to say, here's what I see, and I see all my dreams, and I see who I am, that was exactly what they want. And I want to just mention one thing too. Don't you agree that there is no right pageant answer to
That's
any interview question?
Yes, I agree. I mean, there's been times I've heard girls tell me, oh, I told this or that in the interview. And there's a part of me that's like, aren't you breaking all the pageant rules? And that's exactly it. There isn't a right or a wrong answer. It goes back to what you were talking about before, Wendi, about how you handle the controversy, how you handle that moment that they're looking for. If you're someone who's really funny and you incorporate humor into your answer, that's showing them more of you. They just want to get to know you and who you are.
That is a very good point, Allie. I'm glad you pointed that out. And so what do you think are some of the ways, 3 ways that someone can let the judges know who they are in the interview room?
That's a good question. And I think the first one is being present in the moment. This is another thing that you mentioned before. We go through different challenges or different parts in our life, and I think pageantry really brings out a lot about us. That's part of the reason why I love to compete. I love that journey of self-discovery. And while you're preparing for the pageant, there's going to be a lot of those emotions and feelings that are coming out. And I think it's important to still talk about that. When you're talking about who your role model is or kind of how you feel in that moment, I think it's important for the judges to be able to see that. Are you excited? Are you becoming more confident through this experience? So I'd say being present in the moment. And then, the other thing, I think taking a breath, thinking about the question. Sometimes we get so nervous. I know I can be a sucker to my own nerves, and it's almost like in Charlie Brown where the teacher is talking and it's like no sound is coming out. So taking that breath and listening, being aware of where you are, being present in the moment, listening. And the next thing I would say too is just being true to your gut, who you are. And that's another thing that we touched on. You were saying that you were working with a girl who enjoyed hunting, and that's a part of who she is. And maybe she has really great memories of taking family trips where she can share that with the judges. They get a sense of who you are. I think about, I have a crazy big Cajun family, and sometimes we're loud and we overtalk each other, but that's a fun way to share who I am as a person.
Yeah, that's a very good points on that one. I think another important element to a successful interview is to share your stories, like Allie just mentioned. So when you're giving your answers, the worst thing you can do is give a generality. It's all about you, and it's got to be more specific. And the other thing is, don't go too long-winded. One thing I don't think works is taking up too much time on one answer. And there's two different ways for you to answer a question. And one is to think of the question as, this is kind of a fluff question. I mean, I can think of one fluff question that I was asked would be maybe, where would you take me if I came to your state on vacation? And so I think of that as a fluff question. So I told them the Mall of America because it's great shopping. I told them to go to Lake Calhoun because that's where you get to meet the people of Minnesota. And I also said to go uptown because it gives you the flavor and culture that Minnesota has to offer. So it's like boom, boom, boom. To belabor it and go on is like, you have to know when to stop in these interviews, and particularly when it's something that's not relevant to you necessarily winning the title. If they ask you a question about your platform or what do you see yourself doing as the first thing once you win the pageant, or if you win the pageant, that could take a little more time, or maybe they would ask you, why do you want to win the pageant? That could also be something, or why did you choose this as your platform? So think about when you're being asked questions, how important that is, and make sure you don't go too long and belabor the story too long.
That's a good point. Well, and I think sometimes part of the reason why we give those long, extended answers is because we really haven't thought through it. We haven't thought through how we feel about something, and so we're grabbing and grabbing and grabbing. And sometimes it can be really challenging in an interview if you are a verbal processor. That's how I am. I'm one of those people that always talks through something.
Not you, Allie.
Yeah. Thanks, Wendi. And so sometimes you find yourself in the interview where they're asking a question and you really are having to think through it. And I think that's why it's important to still take that pause so that you can give a clear and concise answer and then focus more on what you really want to talk about. That's a great point, Wendi.
Now, let's go ahead and do a little bit of role play in the interview room. What was actually one of your questions that you were asked for Mrs. Minnesota America?
The first question out of the gate was, what has been my biggest achievement in life?
And what did you say to that, Miss Allie Carr?
Well, I've actually had the incredible opportunity to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. So I traded in my high heels and put on hiking boots, which I never owned any footwear like that. And I climbed over 19,000 feet to raise funds for age education in Tanzania, Africa. I did this with Venture Expeditions. And I've actually been associated with them now for over 7 years and had the opportunity to travel to Thailand with them. But there's nothing quite like being able to summit a mountain, knowing that you're doing it for a cause. And that was what was really incredible about that journey.
Good point about that. And so I just want to speak to everybody else right now that I get a lot of questions about, do I need a platform? Well, do I really need to have some charity work that I'm doing? Do you see how tying in her story, which first of all, to climb Kilimanjaro anyway is pretty amazing. But the fact that she did it for something positive is even more impressive. And if you're a judge, you're looking for somebody who's a real leader and somebody who's got a good heart and has good intentions. So I think that does come into play. And even though the America system is not necessarily a platform-based system, I really feel like that is such an important part to you being well-rounded as a woman. Mm-hmm. And also to be a good title holder, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that, even the little ones, my daughter won National American Miss 2 years ago, and we had a lemonade stand and raised $1,200 for children with cancer. So at a young age, you can do something. At an older age, you absolutely have got to be doing something in your community, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Other pageant coaches might just say, well, you could put something down, but I really feel not only is it going to propel you forward in the interview room and it creates passion, but also once you win, what are you going to do with it? Put it on the shelf and look at it and smile that I won? So I just think it's so important to give back with such a gift that you've been given. Now, Allie, what did you say, or what would you promote as the title holder? So what is your platform?
Well, my platform is Venture Expeditions. I'm partnered with them, and their whole mission is benefit the world, discover the soul. So just like I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with them, through that process, not only was it to do something to benefit others, but it benefited me. That was where I learned that journey, where now as a married woman, my husband and I think a little bit differently about how we spend our money, how we look at generosity, how we think about people throughout the world. And then even spending our Christmas holiday in Thailand this year to celebrate with those who are hearing about Christmas and about the meaning of Christmas for the very first time. And so if I was a title holder and even now as Mrs. Minnesota America, part of what I do is represent Venture Expeditions and encourage people that in the process of benefiting the world, that they can discover their own soul.
Very nice answer, Allie. You get an A. Ding,
oh,
ding,
thank you.
Woo! Do the happy dance. Okay. All right, I'm going to give you kind of a ridiculous question, but unfortunately, this is the question that my client who competed at Ms. Wheelchair Minnesota got as her final question, which I don't know. I'm not that happy about this question for a woman in her 20s. Well, actually, no, she's 30. Okay, you tell me. Everyone at home, all pageant girls, you tell me, do you like this as a final question? If you could be any superhero, who would it be and why?
Okay, well, I have always loved the Spider-Man movies, but part of what I love about the story, I know I would totally be Spider-Man because I love the fact that Peter Parker was the underdog. He was kind of the nerdy kid in school, and I think there's something about in each of us that we can relate to that. But then he took this opportunity of having a superpower and taking it to a little bit of a different level. And even in the movie, they quote, with great power comes great responsibility. And so I love that he lives his life that way. And I think part of that's what being a title holder is about. He got bit by this magical spider, but in a way, we get a crown and a banner. And it's, what are you going to do with it? Who are you going to impact?
Ooh, nice turnaround at the end, Allie. Because I was wondering where you were going with Spider-Man. And believe me, everyone in the audience would be wondering, what is she going to do with this Spider-Man comment? And how will this help her win?
But I think sometimes there can be those challenging questions or, ones that you just feel like, I don't know where to go with this, and you feel like you're grappling for it. And that's where you have to make, they give you lemons and you got to make lemonade.
Hey, listen, I think you just squeezed some out, so that was pretty darn good with that answer. Okay, awesome. So here's another one that I also heard asked on the same stage is, who is your role model and why?
Well, my role model is actually the founder of Venture Expeditions. Him and his wife, Candice, it's a married couple, Paul and Candice Hirkman, and watching how they live their lives is incredible to me. Their generosity, their sensitivity to others, that's what inspires me to continue to give back in my community. Whether it's sacrificing a family holiday, going to Thailand with my husband to spend time with other people, or climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, they're the ones that really are that inspiration for doing those things.
Love it. I loved it because you really painted a picture, and it was an interesting person. You didn't go for the obvious people. I mean, it's usually we hear Oprah, and there's a myriad or a handful of others that you hear over and over again. So it's nice that you chose someone who is maybe more accessible and more real, and that heroes can come in many different forms. It doesn't have to be someone on such a grand scale that they're on TV or in the movies, or that they're making millions of dollars a year. It's someone who really has had a simple concept that they followed through on, and they're touching millions of people's lives. So that's, I think, as a judge, for me, I would be impressed by that choice. So choice is very important in answers. And even though you and I talked that the answer itself is not that important, but I do like the choice, and I do think it needs to be something that hits close to home.
Well, and I think you have to think about what that communicates about you. On the other side, usually the first thing I think of too is my grandmother, and she's a breast cancer survivor. And that's another piece to tell that's a great story about you. But, you have to think about what you're having that opportunity to communicate to the judges by expressing who is your role model, who you look up to, what their values are.
Very nice. Well, one that I've heard before was, what are the three most important qualities that a title holder should possess? And I heard this on the Mrs. Minnesota America stage.
I would say, I think that in title holder, she needs to be driven, because a lot of titles, a lot of pageants, you're going to have to be out in the community making your appearances, and you have to be driven to make that happen. The other thing is being compassionate. I think a title holder should be compassionate. One of the opportunities that I had as Mrs. Minnesota America was to visit the VA on Valentine's Day and pass out Valentines to our veterans, to show compassion to them, to build that relationship with them. Now, a lot of times in a pageant, we're on stage, we're in our swimsuits and our evening gowns, but that's not all that encompasses what a reigning title holder does. So I think a lot of it is going to be the compassion. It's also being driven. And the last thing I'd say is great communication skills, to be out in your community and to be able to communicate about your platform.
Okay, so I love that you gave each one, and you gave a specific example of something. So you're really painting a picture. Now, there has been, and I know for a fact that during the interview process, there are judges who will say, give me 3 words to describe yourself. And if they ask in the room specifically 3 things, then you don't want to go on. Because I had a client who actually started explaining, and he goes, that's more than 3 words. So right. You do need to, you might get a stickler in there. But on stage, final question, of course they're not expecting just 3 words. They're hoping you will explain it. So that was really beautiful in your descriptions and your stories, and it definitely left the judges without any question in their mind.
And I think if you ever have one of those situations when it's in one-on-one and you don't realize and you go into explaining, I think it's how you recover it. It's how you joke back with them and be like, oh, I guess I'm a rule breaker, or have fun or say something that kind of, plays off a little bit. And I think that's a great way to still recover from something like that.
Now, what is a don't in the interview room? What would you say is like the biggest don't that you've seen?
Oh, well, I think it goes back to a lot of the basics. It's watching the ums, and it's staying polished, remembering that this is a job interview. I think sometimes we can think that, well, that's a pageant interview, it's different. But would you walk into a job interview not prepared? Would you have paperwork that wasn't complete? Would you wear something that was ill-fitting or stained or wasn't what they were looking for that particular position? I think those are things that you should all consider. I think the biggest don't is waiting until that moment right before you're outside the door to start preparing. The preparation starts months and months before, not when you arrive pageant weekend.
Well, that is right. Thank you for that, Allie, because I think that, well, for me, pageant preparation normally would start 6 months out if you can. If you're a seasoned competitor, probably 3. But at the same time, realistically, if you don't have the interview skills and if you haven't won your first pageant, interview is the first place to begin, as well as your overall image that you're projecting. So whether you work with somebody, maybe it's a girlfriend, or I have a client who actually said that she was Skyping with one of her friends and they would ask each other interview questions. Because as much as we all, love to get coaching and get help, help for our pageant, there's so many things to go over that you need to be able to do some things on your own too. So the interview is something that you can either have your husband ask you questions, your mom ask you questions, your sister ask you questions, a best friend. So you can get used to hearing the question, taking a pause, and then answering it and being spontaneous without having a moment where you're literally not able to think. Sometimes people freeze up in an interview room, right? So it
Yeah.
really helps them to get past that. The other thing I highly recommend is to set up a mock interview before your pageant. And a mock interview would be either your pageant coach would set this up. I know that I set this up with my clients, where you'd have some judges of different diverse backgrounds, maybe who know pageants or who don't know pageants, just like you would have in a real environment. And they would be given your paperwork, and you would come in and act as if it was the genuine interview with the same time constraints. So if you're doing a panel judged pageant, then that's how you would mock. If you're doing an individual one-on-one pageant, that's how you would mock, and you would do it within the time constraints that your real pageant is all about, so that you feel completely prepared. You can get honest feedback, and if they can't be honest with you, have them write some notes down and have someone read it to you. I've had to do that before because no one wants to say anything negative in the room, and everyone's like, everything was fine, it was good. So sometimes you need the honesty, and I know that's one of my fortes, right, Allie? I'm good
Yes.
at being a little honest.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, but in a good, constructive way. You need people who are going to be surrounding you, who are supportive and yet are going to be helpful to help you improve. That's the name of the game, is to improve, right?
Exactly. I think that's a really great point, Wendi. That was one of the things that I wrote down, is having people that are going to be honest with you, because you can practice and practice and practice, but if no one is actually going to tell you, I think you could dig a little deeper here, or I feel like we're not getting everything. The other thing that I also do is I do a lot of journaling before it comes to pageant competition. I try to think back to a lot of my different life experiences, things I've done. I think sometimes it can be challenging for us to sell ourselves. We get caught up, we feel like we're going to be vain, or we're not going to show humility. But sometimes I think going through that process and that journey of remembering what you've done in your life, what you're proud of, and who you are, it can help draw out some of those things so that you can exude a confidence and show the judges that you are the title holder.
Very good point. I actually have a client who's going to be competing in a Mrs. system, and that's exactly what she said. She goes, well, I'm not used to talking about myself and building myself up to people, and I'm very Christian, and I don't believe in doing all that. I'm very humble. And I said, well, that's all well and good. However, the judges are there to get to know you, and by giving them facts about you and sharing the things that you're doing in the community, or sharing yourself with your answers, that's not pumping yourself up. That's just being truthful and factual. You're telling them the way it is. And so there's a way to do that with grace and humility without being overly obnoxious about it. Exactly. And that is very important to do. And I think women overall, whether it be in business or in life, in everyday life, that can be a problem for women overall, and I think women need to get over it and move forward and sell yourself, because this life is all about selling yourself, and if you don't, someone else will.
That's a great point.
So, Allie, do you have any other questions or comments that you'd like to impart of wisdom, pearls of wisdom for all of our pageant girls out there?
Well, I think we talked about a lot of really good points, but I think one of the biggest things that I think is important to remember is that really helped me was, as I was preparing for the Mrs. America pageant, someone that Wendi brought in to work with me, his name was Renee, told me something that was really important, and just reminding me that it's not this idea of having to impress this panel of judges, but to just express who I am. And that was something for me that was very freeing, because I think sometimes with pageants we can get into a performance mindset, and all of a sudden it was like, I'm just going to show them me, because who I am is enough, and who I am is great. And I think when you go in with that mindset, and you go in with just saying, I'm going to show them that I can be the title holder, and that I am the title holder, and then you have a lot more fun. You glean a lot more from the experience. And I think that that's something to remember, is that it's not trying to impress this group of people, but more that you get to tell them about who you are.
Very good point. Love that. That is so true. Now, if you guys have any questions at home, you can always feel free to email any questions. You can post them on Pageant Live, and we'll be happy to give you any answers that we can. And Allie was top 10 at Mrs. America, so she did very well. Woo! And I'm sure we'll see more of her in the future. But if you need to reach me also, my website's listed here, and I hope to hear from you guys. Thank you, Allie. That was so much fun.
Thanks, Wendi. Good to see you.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Pageant Live for interview help.